Recently, I've had the amazing privileges of working with the RED Komodo in the studio, being able to take it on location, put it in different lighting situations, and really being able to pull out where this camera shines and where I feel this camera falls short. I would officially like to welcome you guys all to part one of our two-part series, My Thoughts on the RED Komodo. What's good, everybody? For those of you guys who are new to my channel, my name is Sidney Green. I'm a cinematographer and colorist, and for those of you guys who have been around here for a while, I know, long time, no see. Normally I take a break at the end of the year, and I did not do that this year, and I realized that I definitely needed it. But as you can see, we are back swinging out the gate with content, and I'm so happy to finally bring you guys my thoughts on the RED Komodo. Now, I'm not going to be doing this as a traditional review. Tons of amazing creators out there have already had their hands on this camera. So I want to take the series that we're going to be doing from my unique perspective as a colorist. Part one is going to be my initial thoughts of the RED Komodo, kind of what I was feeling once I got the camera out of the box, how it felt when I got my first samples of footage back when I imported them into the computer, and overall what I feel this camera is capable of, what I feel it does great. Part two is going to be going on location and shooting with you guys, and we're going to take all of that footage that we get on location and we're actually gonna hop on the computer in DaVinci Resolve so you guys can really see for yourselves how the RED Code RAW on the RED Komodo really functions in post, where it shines, where the sensor really kind of falls short. And we're also gonna take a comparison to the Zcam E2 F6 with the exact same shots that are shot on the RED Komodo and really see if the $2,000 price difference for the Komodo really shows in its camera performance. Now, the first thing that's gonna strike anybody off the bat when they get a new camera is going to be the build quality. I am in love with the cube style of cameras. I took a leap of faith on the Zcam F6, and it's turned out to be one of my favorite cameras that I've worked with out of a lot of mainstream popular cameras, from the Ursa Mini Pro G2 to the C200, etc. And so the RED Komodo is really no different in that regard. It did feel a little bit heavy, which is something that I like because we're going to want, especially with these smaller form factor cameras, a camera that is going to be a little bit more back heavy. It definitely makes the balancing process on gimbals easier. Off the bat, the camera looks beautiful. It features an RF mount, so of course I did have the RF to EF converter on the camera, and it simply looks stunning, and the build quality is something that I would expect for a $6,000 price tag and from a company like RED. Now, one of the more distinct features on this RED Komodo that you really won't see on other RED cameras is going to be this on-camera touchscreen. Now, the reason why I like this is because it allows the camera to be used in a more run and gun fashion if that is your style. Although it's not the best for focus peaking. One of the big things that we learn when we first start shooting video: don't trust your camera screen. Get a monitor. But the way that the R3D codec, RED Code RAW, works on this camera, the exposure method is really simple. Simply put, we have 6 traffic lights and we don't want any of those dots on, and the best thing we can do is get as few dots as possible. In a perfect situation, you will be able to get all of those traffic lights off, especially in a controlled lighting situation. But in the event that you have to have one of those traffic lights on, we're going to want to avoid having them on in the highlights. This brings me to the functionality of the camera and kind of what I found when it comes to recoverability, exposure, and my initial thoughts on the images. This camera does not do well with overexposure, and as a matter of fact, RED's handbook says that about all of their cameras, that if we're going to be exposing for RED Code RAW, we're going to be able to pull back the shadows. That's where that dynamic range is going to really lie, and that codec is really gonna shine. If you clip them highlights, they are most likely gone. So just keep that in mind if you are using this camera or you rent it. 0 traffic lights or as few as possible, and try to keep them away from the highlights. That brings me to the image itself. Overall, this camera is noisy. This camera is the type where you do have to black balance the sensor, and generally manufacturers have you do that to reduce noise or any type of color fringing and shifting. I had to do it on the C200 as well. You just simply let the camera heat up to its operating temperature and also make sure that it's in the temperature environment you're going to be shooting in, and then you just black shade the sensor. However, even with black shading, I still found myself reducing noise in broad daylight. And even if you take a look at Marcus Brownlee's video, MKBHD, when he's shooting with his 8K RED versus when he made the video about the Komodo and shot it on the Komodo, you can see it in his forehead and in his skin that there was some noise reduction applied. And that's simply because the sensor is smaller, and therefore I believe we are seeing more of that noise pattern. But that being said, the noise reduction really wasn't an issue for me, but it definitely could be an issue for you if you are not shooting on the most high-end computer. You're already going to need a higher-end system because of the 6K files, but that noise reduction can take a toll on your computer's processing power. I have an RTX 3080, and I didn't really have issues until I got to low light. Now, let's go ahead and talk about low light with this camera. This is a global shutter camera, and so it's definitely gonna have some side effects when it comes to the dynamic range of the sensor. And I believe, as I said, shadows are amazingly recoverable with the R3D codec. However, I don't know if I necessarily consider those bottom stops really usable because of the amount of noise that this camera has. There were definitely some situations where I was shooting on this camera where I had to use very, very heavy noise reduction. And we're gonna talk a lot more about that in part 2, so hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. Take a leap of faith that I'm going to explain to you all of those sentiments. But it was a very heavy signature, to say the least. And when I had to bring in that spatial noise reduction is where we really start to see that lack of detail instead of temporal noise reduction. That being said, you might fare better if you used a plugin like Neat Video. Just know that's an extra $200 price tag on top of the $6,000 camera that you are already purchasing. We are going to do a lot more talking about the image of this camera in part 2, but simply put, if you want my initial impressions, I don't feel like this camera is really an A cam or a B cam. I simply feel like it's a specialty niche camera for entry-level VFX or an entry-level action cam, and I will justify those thoughts in part 2, at least why I think that way. But my sentiments on the image and this not really being an A cam, B cam, and really a entry-level VFX or action camera really comes from the fact that it has a global shutter, which is going to be the strength of this camera, and why you would really want the RED Komodo is that if you are doing very, very motion sensitive work, specifically VFX, or you want that tight, crisp look on car videos or action scenes or rolling shots, that global shutter is going to show its strength. So that is where this camera is really going to open up some doors and perhaps allow people to shoot at lower frame rates and still get some decent VFX, and that's what it's all about. And that's why I think that this camera is specifically geared towards that niche and perhaps not so much of the narrative storytelling or content creation that we're all used to. That being said, for a content creator, if you're shooting on a mirrorless, then yeah, you're gonna get an upgrade for the Komodo. So the noise floor of the camera is really the only downside that I see to this system. The only other quirk, which really is not a complaint, is the fact that it uses CFast storage. Now, I understand a few things. First of all, for RED, that's an awesome thing, because if they would have went the RED mag mount, then that would have defeated the purpose of this camera being $6 grand when you would be spending well over $1,000 on storage. Overall, with the CFast card that's 32 gigabytes, you will get 1 minute of recording in RED Code RAW HQ and about 4 minutes of recording in RED Code RAW LQ. So just some things to keep in mind, that storage is still going to be expensive on this camera. It would have also been cool to see them do kind of a USB-C SSD option. That would have been really cool as well, because then we would have had more options with respect to storage that maybe don't break the bank. That being said, I know RED Code RAW is a robust codec, but I have done a lot of SSD recording in my time and it works out just fine. Even a regular mSATA SSD would have been awesome to see in this camera. Nonetheless, we cannot complain as long as we're not spending $2,000. But just something else I wanna keep in mind with you guys is that you will be spending a lot on CFast storage. In conclusion, I have to say that my initial impressions are kind of convoluted. I kind of felt like there was a lot of hype around this camera because I hadn't used it myself. I kind of felt like, oh snap, I'm getting a RED for 6K, and I shouldn't have been so naive. There are definitely some differences, especially having worked with a lot of 8K RED footage, where I see where this camera does fall short. That being said, I still think that this is a great camera and add it to the awesome lineup of all the cameras released in 2020. So again, if you're expecting a high-end RED camera, you will not be getting that, and perhaps you may be disappointed. However, I do think this camera is usable. The question is just where. And for that, if you want my opinions on that, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications, because in part 2, again, we are going to be tearing apart this footage and putting it through its paces. If you guys like this video, be sure to give me a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, turn on those post notifications if you have not. Be sure to follow me on my social media. The links are in the description down below, as well as the YouTube fam. Their links are also in the description down below. And again, guys, if you are considering using this camera, buying it, be sure to rent it from my friend over at Salty's Cameras. A link is in the description down below, so you guys can put this camera through its paces yourself. If you guys are ever feeling uninspired, uncreative, or just want to give up on life, remember, every day airplanes take off against the wind. Keep climbing, stay inspired, and as always, stay fabulous. My name is Sidney, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.